Hello there!
What's up folks, Mike for CMCC Builds here with another optimization build, the Samurai Archer. Why the Samurai Archer? Primarily because I wanted to feature a build that uses an actual bow and arrow rather than the ubiquitous range fighter build, variant human sharpshooter, crossbow expert, archery, fighting style, Battlemaster. Here, we're not using the Battlemaster subclass, so we're not going variant human, and by foregoing variant human or custom lineage, that means we're a feat behind, so crossbow expert and the hand crossbow are out, which opens the window for the slightly more powerful D8 versus D6, and in my opinion much cooler longbow. Surprisingly, damage as a range fighter between this build and the crossbow expert Battlemaster is on par for most of their early adventuring careers. Here we see that for the first half of their careers, the Battlemaster has the edge in DPR, if we use my standard 4 combat adventuring day with a single short rest and progressively higher enemy armor class based on DMG recommendations. When you have the ability to click on auto advantage 3 times per day, the more attacks you can attach to those 3 rounds, the more DPR goes up. So once the Samurai gets the ability to go off with 6 or 7 attacks in a turn at level 11, or up to 9 at level 20, burst damage skyrockets, which buoys damage per round past many of the consistent damage dealers like the Battlemaster. And if we look at burst damage, you can see that very early on the Battlemaster has the edge. It's still a fighter with action surge, and it has its own burst mechanics through superiority dice. But that is short-lived once the first extra attack comes online at level 5, and at that point there's no looking back for the Samurai Archer, peaking at level 20 with round 1 damage over 155 points for the turn. Let's take a moment to talk about burst or nova damage versus DPR. There's an old saying in baseball that a run in the first inning when you're 3 runs behind counts just as much as a run in the bottom of the 9th with the game tied. Intuitively, we think that the 9th inning run that just won the game is better than the first inning run that didn't even give the team the lead, but the value is the same. And if that 9th inning run came 1 or 2 or even 8 innings earlier, the game would have already been over. The result, the same. This is actually a pretty advanced sabermetrics concept that was developed to counter the idea of a clutch run or clutch player, which actually has very little statistical merit, and I find a lot of people in the D&D community have this mentality that works perfectly in a game like baseball. Damage is damage whether it comes in round 1 or round 4, but there's a major difference. There aren't 4 set rounds in D&D. In fact, you can do enough damage to drop the enemy's number of turns to 0. And to do that, you need to inflict a lot of damage as a percentage of total hit points as early as possible. In addition, you need to go first, which is why initiative is so important. If you haven't watched my initiative video, you really should check it out. I go into detail on how and why initiative is so important in this game. So the more damage you can do early, the better. In other words, not all DPR is equal. A 30 DPR where one character does 60 damage in round 1 and 0 in round 2 can be better if that round 1 damage is enough to kill the enemy and prevent them from having a turn, because on their turn, they may just be able to kill you or your allies. And that 0 damage may sound ridiculous, but it's completely viable. For example, to be a bugbear, gloomstalker fighter who can action surge for 6+ attacks in round 1, all at an additional 2d6 damage, and then on round 2 decide to cast Spike, Growth, or Fog Cloud to help protect your allies. This very simple concept, the sooner you can kill your enemies, the better, epitomizes the value of the burst damage build. Hit first, hit hard, which also happens to be great fighting advice for real life, but that's a different conversation. It's important to note that when you have as many attacks as the Samurai, similarly to the Monk, anything that boosts the damage of attacks via a plus to attacker damage rolls or damage that stacks on top of a hit, it just skyrockets the DPR of these types of builds. And yet, despite how good they are, the Samurai may actually be the best defensive fighter in the game. The Eldritch Knight, with access to the shield and absorb element spells, may still have the lead, but it's certainly a conversation. Abilities like the added temporary hit points from Fighting Spirit, wisdom saves with Elegant Courtier, and the ability to just not die from strength before death boost those defensive capabilities to the top of the fighter tier list. In addition, Samurai get added skill proficiencies and boosts, proficiencies that can actually matter in-game like Insight or Persuasion, along with the ability to use the latter with Wisdom, which helps to make the build a little less mad. In fact, since this is functionally just a dex build, you have some points to play with and can invest a little into Wisdom and Charisma, as we'll see. How good is this subclass? Gloomstalker is rightfully considered the most powerful ranger subclass, and one of the best martial subclasses in the entire game. And the Samurai is often placed in the lower tiers of fighter subclasses, and I'm not about to tell you that the Samurai is as powerful as the Gloomstalker, but I will say they share plenty of similarities. Allow me to illustrate. The Gloomstalker gets an extra first round attack and later gets a pseudo third attack at level 11. The Samurai gets a pseudo fourth attack at level 15 when it can turn an advantaged attack into 2 regular attacks. The Gloomstalker gets built-in advantage by being unseen to those with dark vision. The Samurai gets built-in advantage with a bonus action Fighting Spirit. At level 7, they both get the great defensive ability of proficiency in wisdom saving throws, which is functionally a free feat, resilient wisdom. And as their capstone, they get even more defensive abilities to match their already solid defense and incredibly impressive Nova rounds. The Gloomstalker gets to impose disadvantage on attackers at the cost of a reaction, and the Samurai gets the Barbarian-esque ability Strength Before Death to keep fighting and even get an extra turn when dropped to 0 hit points. We know the build is good both offensively and defensively. Let's get into the details about what we've added to stack and support these features, making this one of the most well-rounded range builds in the game. It's time to jump into the build.
Get my crossbow. Crossbow? What the?
Need a bow and arrow.
For race, you absolutely want to be an elf. The Shatterkai is probably the most powerful elf in the game right now, and Blessing of the Raven Queen, the bonus action teleport that gives resistance to all damage for an entire turn, and necrotic resistance both add substantial defensive features to what is already an excellent defensive fighter build. But I'm not going with the Shatterkai. For this build, I want to go with the Eladrin, which is very similar to the Shatterkai, but just a touch weaker since Monsters of the Multiverse was printed. The big difference is no necrotic resistance and no resistance from teleporting. But instead of that teleport damage resistance, we're going to take Spring, which allows us to touch a willing creature within 5 feet and teleport them 30 feet instead of you. Need to get your buddy out of melee before the big bad gets a turn, run up behind them and bamf them away. And since you're behind them, you'll probably still be out of range of the enemy and able to get your attacks off and back away without allowing an opportunity attack. This is the type of support you usually don't get on a fighter, especially a ranged fighter, and you can do it proficiency times per long rest. In addition, you get all the other great elf abilities. Dark Vision, the best skill proficiency in the game, advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charm condition, immunity to magical sleep, a couple solid defensive abilities right there, a 4-hour long rest, and 2 potentially rotating weapon or tool proficiencies. And of course, you're an elf, which opens up some feat choices down the road. For abilities, using the point buy method as always, taken 8 strength, 15 dex, 15 con, 8 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 10 charisma. Instead of the standard +2 +1 racial increases, use the 3 +1s and put them in dex, con, and wisdom, rounding off dex and con at 16 and bumping wisdom to 15. We'll fix that, and we don't even need resilient wisdom to do it. With your background, take whatever works for your campaign and table. Fill the needed gaps. As a high dex build, stealth, acrobatics, sleight of hand, etc. are all good pickups. Don't shy away from wisdom-based skills either. That +2 modifier is more than decent and will eventually get better. The only equipment needed is the best light armor you can find, and of course, the longbow. There is a version of this build that takes the gunner feat and uses a musket, but I don't like that gun build as much as the gunk build, primarily because it takes 8 to 12 levels to really come together. It's still good at lower levels, but it's too slow to develop for my taste. You should take a melee weapon too, the rapier being the best option out there. For the class, Samurai, all the way. This build will be a perfect example of when not to multi-class. Dipping into Gloomstalker Ranger or Assassin Rogue is just not worth it because it delays the abilities we need to get. This build absolutely thrives on extra attacks, and you get those at 5, 11, 15, and 20, and the defensive abilities, all great, come at 3, 7, and 18. The breakpoints just aren't there. That's not to say you can't multi-class. That may be more or less true depending on your campaign endpoint, which I can't account for here, but if you're going 1 through 20, the Samurai is all you need. For proficiencies, go with acrobatics if you didn't get it already, and I went with animal handling to get some of that mounted samurai feel. Pick whatever works for you. Fighting style, there's only one choice here. Archery, the best fighting style in the game. The +2, especially with a feat like Sharpshooter, is just too good to pass up on this build for any reason. Second Wind adds some more hit points on top of what Samurai will provide in a couple more levels. At 2, Action Surge is an essential part of this build. When you have single turn effects like Fighting Spirit or Dread Ambusher on the Gloomstalker, adding a second action on top of that exponentially increases the effectiveness of that ability. Applying advantage to 1 attack is fine. Doubling that to 2 is nice. Doubling that to 4 is great, and eventually doubling it to 8 attacks, all with triple advantage and Sharpshooter, is nothing short of amazing. And at level 3, the martial archetype Samurai gives an additional proficiency. I would probably take something like Insight, a quality skill that works well with this build's solid wisdom score. Samurai's main draw, of course, is the Fighting Spirit ability. 3 times per long rest, which doesn't scale for some very strange reason, gives 5 temporary hit points and advantage until the end of the current turn. Because it only lasts the 1 turn, you want to stack as many attacks as possible into this turn, and fortunately, Fighter is the best chassis in the game to do just that. I don't want to gloss over those 15 temp hit points either. At a point when this build only has 29 hit points, you get an additional 50% on top of that total with this ability. A ranged build with nearly 45 hit points at level 3 is nothing to sneeze at. At level 4, with the first feat, take Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter and Advantage go together like peanut butter and chocolate, french fries and milkshakes, alcohol and bad decisions. With the archery fighting style and Advantage, Sharpshooter becomes that much more potent. And at level 5, extra attack comes, furthering the benefits from Fighting Spirit. Level 6, thankfully, brings another feat, and despite having a 16 dex, we're going to take Elven Accuracy and put that +1 into Dexterity, bringing that to an odd score of 17. That's okay, we'll fix that in 2 levels. The triple advantage afforded by Elven Accuracy, along with guaranteed on-demand advantage from Fighting Spirit, makes this well worth it. Right now, the Crossbow Expert Battlemaster is making more attacks, 5, with Action Surge and a bonus action attack, but those are all normal attacks. The Samurai is making 4 attacks and rolling 12 dice to do it. At level 7, the Samurai gets Elegant Courtier, which allows your Wisdom mod to be added to persuasion checks. Not as good as Proficiency, but it helps. Along with this, they get Proficiency in Wisdom saving throws, which makes mind control spells that much easier to defend against, because this ability and the elf's natural resistance to charm effects through Fey ancestry, and eventually the fighter's Indomitable feature. The last thing you want from a burst damage build like this is to get mind controlled, turn around, and one-shot your wizard before you have a chance to shake off the charm effects. This build makes that scenario largely avoidable. Defense matters. At 8, we round off Wisdom, bringing it to 18 with the Piercer feat. This half feat allows for a once per turn reroll of any damage die and a piercing damage brutal critical, where you can roll an additional die on a critical hit. That former clause, rerolling a single damage die, is incredibly difficult to quantify because player choice plays heavily into the feature's value. On a single D8 roll, you should always reroll on a 4 or less. That's easy. But if you have 4 different rolls that turn, your chances of rolling a 1 just grew substantially. The player needs to predict the possibility of a future roll on that turn being lower than the current low roll. The simple rule I use is something like this. On a single roll, we know to reroll anything 4 or lower. 2 rolls, anything 3 or lower. 3 rolls, 2 or lower. And 4 rolls, wait for that 1. In all these scenarios, if it's your final roll, go back to the original plan of rerolling a 4 or lower. At level 9, more defensive abilities with Indomitable, which allows for a reroll of any failed saving throw. This ability is generally not very good because fighters often have gaping holes in their saving throws and ability scores, but this build has that additional Wisdom saving throw proficiency along with Strength and Constitution. The high Dex score aids those Dexterity saving throws. Even Charisma is a wash with no negative score. Intelligence is the only area of true weakness in this regard, so rerolls with the Indomitable feature actually have a chance to succeed in most cases, unlike your standard fighter build. Level 10, Tireless Spirit provides the Samurai with a single use of Fighting Spirit if they start a combat without one. These types of abilities start with a single use of a feature if you ran out, are usually just bad. But on this particular build, because of the compounding effect of Action Surge and the additional attacks that come at level 11, 15, and 20, this single use of Fighting Spirit can be quite powerful. It's at this point you want to make sure to spend all Fighting Spirit uses in that first combat of the day. Each combat beyond that first then becomes an added use of Fighting Spirit, and ideally it comes after a short rest, so Action Surge replenished. In my standard adventuring day of 4 combats per day with 1 short rest, this ability literally doubles your uses of Fighting Spirit for half of your adventuring career. And it's at this point, and with the 3rd attack at level 11, that the Samurai, which long ago left the Battlemaster in the dust with burst damage, pulls ahead in DPR as well. From here on out, the Battlemaster just can't do enough to catch the Samurai in either metric. At level 12, we finally max Dexterity, getting that to 20. At 14, with another ASI feat, we take Fey Touched Wisdom to round off Wisdom at a very respectable 16. You may be thinking the Eladrin already has a teleport option, and you're right, they do. But this allows for 1 additional use per day, which is always great for any build that doesn't want to be in melee, and we certainly don't. This build doesn't have Crossbow Expert, melee is bad. But more importantly, we want to save any uses of Spring Teleport for our allies, especially the squishier ones who may need our help getting away from the bad guys. This helps us do that, and it also gives a second spell, and here we can pick up Hex, which allows us to get a nice damage boost when we either don't have any uses of Fighting Spirit or have a bonus action free. Target the enemy's strength or dex, whichever is better, so they're at disadvantage against your buddy's grapple or shove attempts. Level 15's Rapid Strike allows you to take an attack with advantage and split it into 2 attacks. Why would you want to do that? When each attack does a lot of extra damage, either from things like Sharpshooter or big bonuses for magic weapons or buffs like Holy or Elemental Weapon that add additional dice to damage rolls, you want as many attacks as possible. This allows you to do just that. At level 16 with another ASI feat, you could take Crossbow Expert here, or even Gunner if you wanted to forego the +2 dex earlier and pair this with another half feat like Skill Expert. The primary use for this feat would be to allow you to attack in melee with a ranged weapon without getting disadvantage on the attack. But with multiple teleport options to get out of melee and my focus on making an incredibly well-rounded build with minimal weaknesses, I'm going to take Ritual Caster Wizard here. This gives 2 first level rituals and the ability to cast rituals up to our current level, which at 16 means we can cast every wizard ritual in the game. All we need to do is find them and copy them into our ritual book. I love the flavor of this, Miyamoto Musashi and Book of the Five Rings style, or Jin Sakai meditating and writing poetry, and the fact that this character is an elf that doesn't sleep just adds to the meditative vibe, constantly trying to improve both physically and mentally even when resting. The primary first level ritual is easy to pick, Find Familiar. This does work for us here. In addition to all the things you're used to with Find Familiar, scouting, bringing things to allies, the help action, etc. Here, providing the help action for an attack actually allows the samurai to take an additional attack. So when those uses of Fighting Spirit run out, your familiar can still provide advantage on a single attack each turn, which then results in one more attack. So your familiar just gives you another attack in addition to being a fantastic scout, which can help you sneak up on enemies, helping you to get surprised, giving you even more options for advantage attacks. The second ritual can be any of the other good first level rituals. Detect Magic or Comprehend Languages are good utility options. Pick whatever is lacking in your party. Other rituals you should try to get your hands on are Floating Disc, Unseen Servant, Tiny Hut, Water Breathing, Telepathic Bond, and of course, Phantom Steed. Now you can be this. What? No. I mean, something like this. Yeah, that's better. At 18, Strength Before Death just lets you straight not die and interrupt the enemy's turn with potential for massive damage. Oh, you kill me? No, I kill you. This is a powerful feature that adds to an already resilient build. At 19, the final ASI feat, and here there are some options. Crossbow Expert again is viable. If you find yourself in melee a lot, or your party loves to shove enemies prone, you probably need to take this so you can run up into melee and Legolas some enemies right in the face with advantage from them being prone instead of at disadvantage. Lucky is another good option, which just makes this build defensively incredible, as getting 3 free rerolls just takes everything to another level. But I like Alert here. Why? Because winning initiative is that much more important at level 19 and 20. It's already important right from level 1, but when creatures have godlike powers, making sure that they don't get a turn or at least get one less turn than you can make a world of difference. And finally, level 20, the 4th attack, which allows for an Action Surge, Fighting Spirit, Rapid Strike combo of 9 attacks in round 1. As you can see, damage jumps sky high with DPR at 85 and burst damage at 155. So there we have it. You want to be a defensive stalwart, one of the most well-rounded fighters with fantastic DPR and incredible burst damage numbers, all with a high dex score to stay out of danger, sneak up on enemies, and win initiative? Now you got it. See you here next time, folks.